Thank you very much, Jen. Right, so we bang on time to move on to the next talk. This is by Tom Yazwinski, who's from the US. Hey, welcome across here, Tom. And he's going to talk about some work he's been doing with sensitivity, anthelmintic sensitivity to various cattle nematodes following different treatment regimes. So Tom, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I got a little instruction from previous speaker who did a terrible job with the clicker at the beginning, so she ought to know how well to use this. Another point I'd like to say is, Dr. Miaja, I told you years ago that we had resistance in Arkansas in the United States. Matter of fact, since the late 1990s, I've been talking about resistance. It just escalated to the point that it's more common than not on most of the beef stocker herds. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about a long-range study that we did 2 years ago where we looked at Eprinomectin long-range compared to Dectomax and Albendazole, compared to saline for a whole grazing season. And at the end of that study, that 120-day study, we did a fecal egg count reduction test with the animals that we had still available to us to take a look at how the different macrocyclic lactones were performing at the end of that study, where we had a really defined pre-exposure of the worms to the treatments that we could really focus on. So that's what this study is all about. So the study, the presentation will be in two parts. I'm going to spend too much time on going through the initial grazing season that set up the fecal egg count reduction study, and then I'll talk about the results from the fecal egg count reduction study. So the study we did previously, or the first study that we did, was we had 8, let me get over here so I can see this. Here's the treatment groups during the first grazing season. It was saline group, Dectomax with valbazen, and long range. And we had 8 pastures with the saline group, 12 each with the Dectomax, valbazen, and 12 pastures with the long range. At the end of this study, we took one animal from each pasture and we necropsied that animal to see what the actual worm loads look like in the animals. And at that point, at the end of the study, the other 3 animals per pasture, and here's the number of pastures, 3 animals from each pasture were allocated to either an Ivomec group, a Dectomax group, or a Cydectin group to take a look at fecal egg count reductions. Now here's the characters of the play. Here's the major worm. Whoop. Oh, I didn't follow your advice. Okay, the major player in this study was a strongylid egg. We had a few of the other eggs that were in the animals, but primarily the strongylid egg was the one that we followed for the fecal egg count reduction. But we also did coprocultures all the way through, so we had that definition also to what was going on. Here is what the grazing season study looked like. We had good egg counts, and this is least square means. We had good egg counts all the way through. The combination group did away with egg counts for a short period of time, but at the end of the grazing season, there was no significant difference in egg counts coming out of the control animals, the long-range animals that were supposed to still have efficacy going on, and the combination group. Halfway through the study, we lost our significant difference in egg counts. Now, these are least square means, so they kind of look kind of blunted as to how significant. Only 200 eggs per gram, 160, 142. That doesn't seem too awful terrible. But when you take a look at the actual high egg counts in each treatment group during the study, we had animals with over 1,000 eggs per gram all the way through the study. And at the end of the study, in all groups, we had, well, I want to go back here. We had animals with well over 1,000, 2,000 eggs per gram in each of the treatment groups. That's an awful lot of eggs be coming out of these animals. Now, these are grazing stocker cattle. We have most of our parasitism in our beef animals at the stocker level. They come to a stocker operation or a background operation already with worm nodes that have been hit 2 or 3 times with an anthelmintic, and then they are put on pasture that are heavily contaminated with resistant worms from the previous grazing group of animals. So that is where we have a major focus of our resistance. I would also like to mention at this particular point, Dectomax was used in one of the combinations, in a combination group, Dectomax with valbazen, compared to saline in the long range. Dectomax is the most popular anthelmintic in Arkansas, and it's been the most popular anthelmintic for about 20 years. People just love using that. I don't know if their salespeople give the stuff away or whatever it is, but everybody uses Dectomax. So there seems to be a preconditioning of resistance in our worms to Doramectin, to Dectomax. Well, we need to do an awful lot more how much side resistance there is between the macrocyclic lactones, but for sure, Doramectin has an awful lot of selection for resistance in Arkansas since it's such a successful anthelmintic there. Okay, as I said, all the way through the study, we did coproculture so that not only did we get egg counts, we also got larval harvest and percent of the eggs as different species of the strongyles. And for the most part, I use tails to tell the larvae apart, but you have to use the tails in combination with the heads and in combination with the whole body size to tell. But this study also not only had the egg counts, it also had the coproculture results. And if we follow the coproculture data all the way through the grazing study, Oesophagostomum is a significant player in Arkansas, but not as significant as a couple other species of strongyles. Started low in the grazing study, just about disappeared in our summer where we get all of our inhibition of Oesophagostomum, and then towards the tail end, it kind of cropped up a little bit. And that's where we did the fecal egg count reduction study. Hymonchus, a big player in Arkansas. The combination did away with it for a short period of time, but then by the end of the grazing study, at the start of the fecal egg count reduction study, half of our strongyle eggs were Hymonchus. When I came to Arkansas in 1977, which is before y'all, some of you showed up, I could not find two Hymonchus to rub together in Arkansas cattle 35 years ago. And now it is a very common worm in our cattle in Arkansas. And if it's not global warming, then it must be anthelmintic resistance in combination of that. But this worm has really blossomed in Arkansas over the last 40 years. So it's a very important worm in these cattle. Cuperia punctata is our other big player in older stocker cattle. Started off about 1/3 of the worm eggs, and at the end of the study, about 1/3 of the worm eggs. That Cuperia was the only one that continued to come through our stocker cattle after that initial combination treatment. So it looks like it's most susceptible to Doramectin and valbazen, but after that, it creeps back into these animals. When we did the fecal egg count reduction study, about 1/3 to 40% of our eggs were Cuperia punctata. Cuperia oncophora, relatively important worm in younger cattle, but by the end of this study, as you can see, we had no Cuperia oncophora coming through in our grazing animals. The worms, the Cuperia oncophora gets kicked out of our grazing animals pretty quickly. Punctata has pretty much eclipsed oncophora in our animals. And that's another reversal from what I've seen earlier in my career at Arkansas. Oncophora was our major worm all the way through. But now punctata has taken over in Arkansas. Two trends that have changed in the last 30 years and 40 years. Oesophagostomum is becoming more important in Arkansas, and this kind of illustrates what happens normally. It was low at the beginning of the grazing study, but by the time of the fecal egg count reduction study, it had the same sort of a profile that Oesophagostomum did. And we're finding that an awful lot, that Oesophagostomum, it's a worm that very few people talk about and notice and worry about, but it is becoming more and more prevalent in Arkansas. And I also feel that it is developing resistance on its own that we're all not paying that much attention to. So those animals that we necropsied at the end of the grazing study, at the beginning of the fecal egg count reduction study, these are the adult Oesophagostomum levels. There was no significant difference, and we had worm burns as high as 133,000 Oesophagostomum per animal. We had very few early four-stage larvae of Oesophagostomum, which meant at the time of the fecal egg count reduction study, we were having good transmission and very little inhibition. Oesophagostomum late four stages, we had good populations there, which meant that the worms were transitioning well through the parasitic stages in the animals at the time of the fecal egg count reduction. Hymonchus, no significant difference between those grazing groups, and we had as many as 11,600 Hymonchus per cow. Those levels that we used to see just in goats and sheep, and now we're seeing that in cattle. It used to be you opened up an abomasal content into a bucket, you would never see it move for cattle. Now we see it move just like it does with hymoncosis in sheep and goats. I wish I could have bought stock in hymoncosis about 40 years ago. I'd be a millionaire. Cuperia punctata, the other big player, no significant difference between the treatment groups, and we had as many as 47,000 Cuperia punctata per animal at the time of the fecal egg count reduction study. So here's a little synopsis of what things look like at the start of the fecal egg count reduction study, at the end of the grazing portion of the study. Egg counts are between 500 and 350. These are arithmetic means. The major players at the time of the fecal egg count reduction study was punctata and hymoncosis, with some Oesophagostomum and Oesophagostomum there as well. Now let's look at the efficacies that we found at the end of the grazing study. Now I've got two bars for each pasture source of infection. I'm going to concentrate, because I'm not a statistician, and it would take hours for me to explain it to myself as to what the difference is here. But we have basically two ways, many ways, of expressing fecal egg count reduction performance. One major way is to take a look at the mean of the group at the day 0, and then again the mean of the group, the treatment group, at day 14. So you compare the mean to the mean and do a fecal egg count reduction, percent reduction based on the mean of the group. Another way of doing it is take a look at each animal as it went from day 0 to day 14 and calculate the percent reduction for that animal. So that each animal in that group has the same weight of importance when you come to the final analysis. When you just look at the mean of the group, of the arithmetic mean of the strongyl egg count, pre-treatment and post-treatment, the animals with the high egg counts bias the results that you get in the fecal egg count reduction. But that is a major way we look at fecal egg count reduction, so I'm going to stick with that for these slides. I'm just going to be talking about the pink bars and not the blue bars. 3 minutes, okay. I can do it. I think I can do it. I think I can do it. Okay. Regardless of where the animals came from, control pasture, combination pasture, long-range pasture, Ivomec did not get to the 90% line. You need 90% line in order to call yourself significantly effective in cattle. So there's no change of how well ivermectin did. It just didn't do well regardless of where the animals came from. With Doramectin, there was no real difference between control pasture and combination, but it looked like there was a reduction of efficacy in Doramectin if the animals came from the long-range pasture. That one big dip there, one animal treated with Dectomax at the end of the study, its egg count went up 800%. It might be just a weird animal, but that's what drove that one particular column. With moxidectin at the end of the study, we had good efficacy in animals from control pasture, combination pasture. I do see that moxidectin did drop a little bit in efficacy if the animals came from the long-range pasture. So it looks like Dectomax got hit bad by the long-range prior exposure, and also moxidectin. Looking at all the drugs across all pastures, Doramectin, not very effective. Moxidectin, over 90% effective, regardless of where the animals came from. At the end of the study, it was Cuperia punctata and hymoncosis that were the major players in the fecal egg count reduction. And a little bit of difference in the profile, whether the animals were moxidectin treated or ivermectin treated. Conclusions: it appears that after one grazing season, anthelmintic efficacy of some mLs, and I'm talking moxidectin and Doramectin, may be lessened due to the non-efficacious Eprinomectin long-range activity that is not corrected by a combination of piggyback treatment if you see that eggs are still coming out of these animals during the study. I'd like to thank Zoetis for funding that prior study just before the fecal egg count reduction study. I'd like to thank the folks at Buiatrics for accepting my paper as a presentation. Regardless of how it was presented here, it's an honor to come to this group. I'd like to thank you all for coming to this particular presentation. And I've got 30 seconds. And I'm not going to take a selfie. because a selfie would mean that I'd be in it, and I don't want to do that.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm afraid we have run out of time for questions,
Okay.
but again, the coffee break will be a time to go and grab Tom and ask him some questions.